What's up, PWT Universe? The time is finally now, and no, I'm not talking about John Cena. I'm talking about the Mr. McMahon Netflix docuseries. Ooh, I've been really excited for this thing, but I truly don't know what to expect from this thing, so I'm gonna watch it live with you guys, pause, give my reactions, and then compile it together in a nice little review form. And I'm going to do this for every episode of the Mr. McMahon Netflix docuseries. Before I hit play and jump into this thing, I have to say shame on you, IWC. Shame on the degeneracy of the TikTok-brained, 2-minute attention span type of people we have in the IWC. I don't know, just floating around in the world in general. I don't mean to cut a rant on my peers, but you go on X and your entire timeline is flooded with every scene, every moment, every quote. By 3 a.m. Mountain Time in the US, you go on Twitter, and you just watch the whole documentary right there. Everybody's got a hot take. No one's even let any of this digest for like a day before they give what they think are their hot takes about the Chris Benoit stuff and the Janelle Grant stuff. Let it digest, let it breathe, folks. But enough about the sickos. You guys already hear me roast them on PWT Podcast and PWT Live Show every Wednesday and Saturday night. So without further ado, please hit that like and subscribe button and let's jump in to Mr. McMahon. Pause. So right off the bat, the documentary starts and it's Mr. McMahon getting into the ring, and this interview, at least his portion of it, was taken in 2021. And they are in an official WWE ring. This isn't like, oh, we set up a fake ring that's like a little stage like in Dark Side of the Ring. No, they're in a WWE ring. Linda's on camera. They got everybody. AEW Spy Shane McMahon, Stephanie, Triple H, Hogan. They got everybody in this doc. So I'm excited. So instantly Vince is like, we're talking about me today. I don't talk about me ever. I'll talk about anyone else but me. No, I don't do that. Which we all knew, but to hear it from the horse's mouth himself is, I don't know. It's compelling. Crazy times in 2024. So the documentary is claiming that the Janelle Grant lawsuit actually halted the production of this documentary or docuseries entirely. I'm actually shocked that they're covering a bunch of the Janelle Grant stuff right off of the rip. Like right off the bat, 5 minutes into the first episode. And I was saying the Janelle Grant stuff could be a whole season 2 of this. Now, who knows if they ever do that or if the WWE would ever let that happen, but I'm sure they have enough, hundreds of hours of footage with interviews, right? So I'm sure they have enough interview stuff stocked up in hindsight, and I'm sure they have a bunch of new information to where we could get a part 2 of this, or like one of those hour, you know how the Nickelodeon documentary about that Dan Schneider guy, they had like an hour-and-a-half long follow-up episode? I could totally see that happening too here with this. So immediately after the Janelle Grant stuff gets brought up, they cut to Vince McMahon and he's sitting there in the interview, and there's some text over the screen that says, the majority of these interviews and all of this stuff was conducted well before these things came out or whatever, right? And then Vince McMahon goes, "Oh, I wish I could tell you the real stories. Holy shit, pal." And he goes, "Holy shit." And like, it's just very foreshadowy and, very weird and eerie, and they're like, "Well, can you tell us one of them?" And he goes, oh no, pal, couldn't do that. Much worse than a stink face from Rikishi." And then right before the opening credits kick off, he goes, "No, it's what I'm telling you. I don't want you to hear these stories. I'll give you enough to where it's interesting. I don't want anyone to really actually know the real me." So who knows if this is going to be BS or not. Bret Hart said something very compelling. He says that pro wrestling is a way for people to let out their aggressions while watching a morality play. Oh my goodness, I wish I had my air horn so I could drop one for Bret Hart on that one. And one for Triple H, because he follows it up and goes, people say wrestling fans are the people who are too stupid to know that it's not real. And Triple H just laughs and he goes, "No, it's the people who are smart enough to know it's real and accept that they're watching a great show." It's so funny. It's like, you guys will watch Jackie Chan fight 400, Tom Cruise fight 5 guys. He can't really do that, and he's 4'4". Yes, we're smart enough to suspend our disbelief. And so they didn't spend long on the Janelle Grant stuff. Obviously, they had to. It was very good how they did it. Like, yo, this stuff is all before, and it's still going to be insane and blow your mind. Just keep this in the back of your mind. I'm sure they're tied in. I'm sure they'll tie it in a bow at the end. And this episode, actually, I should have mentioned at the top, is called Junior. Episode 1 is called Junior. So I'm assuming we're going to get into, Vince as a child, his upbringing, hopefully unveil some things that we didn't know. Most wrestling fans, I think, are snoopy enough to have, at least done a Wikipedia or something on his life. We're talking about Vince Sr. here, so let's see what we can extrapolate from this. Vince McMahon is talking about how he got the crap kicked out of him by his stepdad every day. If anybody listening to this comes from, any form of abuse, like I come from a very traumatic childhood myself, seek help and stuff like that, It's easier said than done. I'm sure some of the abuse and trauma he went through, not to try and take anything off of anything he did, his actions, but I'm sure it plays a part in the actions he took in, his older years himself, which is sad and unfortunate. So Vince talks about how he didn't meet his father until he was 12, and that the whole time he was being abused, his dad never reached out to him, never came to see him. Even when he met his dad when he was 12, he didn't even know his last name was actually McMahon. And even as an adult, he admits, like, in his later years, they never talked about, like, why didn't you come see me all those years? You're a big promoter in Madison Square Garden, like, why didn't you love me type thing. He never had that conversation. It was very sad. So Vince met Linda when she was 13 and he was 16. More common back in the day. It is a little creep, I'd say, in 2024, now that we're, it's a little like, okay, shouldn't a 16-year-old be babysitting? But I mean, back then it was way more common. She says that she never heard him talk about anything other than making it in wrestling. And, Vince says he only talked business with his dad. And he didn't really see wrestling until he really met his dad. So it's kind of crazy. It's almost like it was destiny. Sort of destiny that he'd start the WWF, not poop on people's heads, allegedly. I think that could have been avoided. So Vince became an announcer because he got sent up to the worst, most out of the way northeast territory, part of the territory his dad had, Bangor. Vince was doing good over there, and then one of the ring announcers were going to walk out unless Vince Sr. paid him this money, and he looked at his son and went, "You go out there." Crazy. He learned in real time. Vince McMahon learned in real time his first time ever going out there. He learned how to improv, how to feed in the fire, what ultimately pro wrestling is, feeding off the crowd, being confident in yourself, all of these sorts of things. So I pray to God while watching this first episode, I pray Tony Khan's watching this, because Vince McMahon, the first 13 minutes in, I hope he draws inspiration from this and not in the self-destructive way. Okay, Tony Khan? He goes, dude, I realize that I have to explain the story to everyone. I don't have to call everything. I have to explain the story. He goes, so we already have the setting. I'm a writer, guys, so I'm marking out for this. Like, Vince just explains exactly what wrestling is. We have the setting. It's in a ring. Okay, we know what they're trying to do. They're trying to beat each other. He goes, we have the environment. And then he says, the next thing you got to do is create interesting characters. There you go. And even the UFC knows this, folks. Characters sell, dude. Sugar Sean O'Malley, Conor McGregor. They understand this, okay? He says it's no different than a play, than books. And so Vince goes on to say that his dad was actually going to sell the company to Gorilla Monsoon, which would have been a crazy timeline. So Gorilla sees him as competition. He works out this deal with his dad. Okay, I'll give you this much money. 3 months later, this much. 3 months later, this much. If I miss a payment, you have the whole business back. He's like, yo, that really perked my dad up, and they all thought he'd fail, but now his dad worked for him, and it's awkward because they don't want the same things for this company, which, I mean, we all kind of knew that. Vince also admits in this episode that he doesn't like the term pro wrestling to this day, which, I mean, we kind of figured that, but I'm glad he's out of the way in WWE. That's so passe, man. But it should be noted that he was ahead of his time for his time, though. Separating, we're not pro wrestling, pal. That was actually ahead of its time. That's what needed to happen to pro wrestling to get it to the levels it got to. Now it can go back to being what it was at its core, and I love that. So they start getting into the territories and how Vince invaded them, but we all know he invaded, he starts promoting, I'm coming to St. Louis, and then people are like, whoa, that's beyond your territory. What's interesting, though, is they show the map of the territories, and Vince McMahon's little WWE in the northeast corner, like, I don't know, it's like a game of Risk. He's literally on the edge of the country, and he spread out, takes over the country, and then takes over the world. It's actually incredibly fascinating. So Vince poaches the talent, Eric Bischoff hops on, and they just talk about, how he took everybody's top talent, and everyone's making a lot of money, and more just on the expansion, and how he's ruffling feathers, and Vince laughs at the notion of, oh, these promoters tell me I'd be at the bottom of a river, pal, and I'm like, oh, these guys love bottoms of rivers. He just did not give a fuck. So Vince would poach talent from a territory. He'd poach 3 guys, and then he'd go and run a show there with 3 of their old guys, and no one could do anything about it. It's crazy, man. So they talk about how Vince, before Hogan, he's looking for this larger than life character. Backlund was a little milquetoast, and Vince basically was like, we were going with Dusty, but Dusty couldn't take advantage of the opportunity I gave him. And Cody is like, well, my dad explained it to me as he was too big. He was too larger than life. I don't know. Crazy. That's crazy. That's a little insight I don't think anybody's ever really talked about too much. So then they go into the whole how he discovered Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan was bred to take on Andre the Giant everywhere. He gets the Rocky movie. Vince Sr. says no. He gets fired, etc. We all know that story. Yo, so at 24 minutes into the first episode, it's the greatest just sequence of stuff ever, okay? So Hogan lays the leg drop. The commentator's like, oh, it's the leg smash. And then Hogan goes, Vince says to me, oh, you know something, dude? I want to take over all the territories. I want to do it with you, Jack. And I was like, and he starts chest pounding and flexing, and Hulk Hogan's like, let's go, brother. And then it cuts to Dave Meltzer. It's some office with fucking boxes, and it's just so funny. And then they start telling the story about Hulk Hogan and the Iron Sheik, and how, there was turmoil with Iran, and you all know the story. It's interesting because they start talking about how, there was the foreigner heel. The Russian was the heel, the Japanese guy was the heel, the evil Iranian guy. And then they show a diversity, they show some black kids being like, yeah, I hate the Iron Sheik. Why? Well, he's from a different country, Tony Atlas is on there, and he says, if you want to know what's going on in America, watch wrestling anytime. It is culture. They said it earlier in the episode too. Mr. McMahon said it. Vince McMahon, if you will. Yeah, call me by my gimmick name. He says it, it is culture. Wrestling, pro wrestling, sports entertainment is culture. WWE specifically is culture, and you do see that. It's a reflection of that even now, man, in 2024. And the whole time I'm sitting here dude, I hope Tony's looking at this going not that it's all about making money and doing dirty backdoor deals and stuff, which pause could mean multiple things but when it comes to Vince, but how to expand what you're doing, and how to have your wrestlers have really great matches and tell really great stories and give people things they'll remember forever. And let's get another WCW versus whatever. We're not making this about AEW, but yeah, I always try and extrapolate some positives, and that was very interesting to me. And Vince talks about regrets, and he's like, if you could go back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years and undo things, everybody would, but we just were reflecting the time. And Vince also says that you can't take the values of now and apply them to then, and you can't even take the values of then and apply them to now. Things change, and he is right about that. Dave Meltzer's like, actually, if I, Tony Khan? No, he's like, you can't, discredit Hulk Hogan. Without Hulk Hogan, Vince fails his expansion, which he's probably right about that. And then Meltzer goes, pro wrestling is a star-driven business. Your popularity is your ability to make stars, and that's what makes you successful. What? Look at AEW, bro. What the heck? I don't mean to make this about AEW, but dude, how are you saying this? And then you shill AEW so much, because of the physical moves and shit. Whatever. We're not getting into that now. If I had a flute, I'd play it, but I'm eating a roast beef sandwich. And Meltzer goes, oh yeah, it was more important to have stars and tell good stories than it was to have good wrestling matches. Okay, but that's bullshit, And in 2024, WWE has phenomenal wrestling matches. Meltzer's such an old senile old bat that he still looks at WWE like that. He doesn't see Randy Orton and Kevin Owens being good. He doesn't see how Cody Rhodes matches are good. You know, he still looks at it like, oh, it's just Hulk Hogan with big production and blah, blah, blah. Silly Dave. And it's crazy because I know we've heard Vince McMahon say the N-word in that infamous thing with John Cena and Booker T standing there, but you never really hear him curse. And he's saying, one time my dad did tell me he was proud, and he was like, you know, all these promoters, son, they're not my actual friends. Fuck them all. I'm proud of you. The one time he was told he was proud by his dad, and it was after all this Hulk Hogan cheeky stuff. But it's interesting hearing him curse. So sadly, you know, Vince is in tears, and he's talking about how the day before he died was the only time his dad ever told him he loved him. And the biggest moment of his life was when his dad told him he was proud of him. And then his dad passed at the age of 69. So then Tony Atlas comes in after Vince is sitting there going, yeah, like it was the most meaningful thing. Not even to say I love you to somebody, but even if someone doesn't care about you, if you care about them, to hear them sort of give you something back, it just means so much. Vince is in tears. He's, I'm crying, pal. And then Atlas comes on the screen and goes, I don't think Vince McMahon really liked his father. So Tony Atlas defends himself. They say, why do you think that? And he goes, well, every idea Vince Jr. had, Vince Sr. it drove him up the walls, and even the wrestlers were pissed at Vince Jr. basically changing this thing they do and making it different. And then Linda McMahon, Paul Heyman, a bunch of people jump on and defend Vince Jr., Mr. McMahon. And they're like, dude, Vince Sr. didn't want to accept, like, the way the industry was changing and how to expand. Even Tony Khan, to this day, wants to expand globally. And all those other promoters would have did it too, but they were happy with just, like, running their little town and making their money and dictating what people get paid in that area, etc. And so Vince wanted to dominate globally, and in order to do that, man, times they are changing. So they talk about how Tony Atlas goes, you know, Vince was never in the wrestling business. He's in the entertainment business. Like, when he first came in, he started that talk show. He's like, and we all thought he was crazy. Damn, I'm looking back at these talk show clips, and Vince was like, it was so much fun. And I'm like, man, they should bring that back. No, I want to go back and rewatch a bunch of these. They were a bit before my time, but I was lucky enough to have a lot of this stuff taped. They're highlighting how Vince crushed it on the David Letterman show, and I gotta EFAP that with you guys, because yeah, Vince was just charming. He was crushing it. He's riffing. He's popping Letterman, and that's, you know, a rare thing to do. He gives you the thumbs up. That's a big deal. So yeah, amazing. And then they of course get into the Cyndi Lauper, Captain Lou Albano, Rock and Wrestling MTV stuff. And then of course WrestleMania follows. You have Hulk Hogan who befriends Mr. T. They do Saturday Night Live, etc., etc. We all know. So they cover the John Stossel thing, but it's funny because this is the first time I believe we're hearing Hulk Hogan say, John Stossel's there, Jack, looking to see if Hulk Hogan's real, dude. So was he there to see if just wrestling in general was real, or if Hulk's making it sort of about him? I don't know if we've ever heard that perspective on it before, but what do you expect from the Hulkster? Hogan's like, dude, I beelined it to Vince and told him, hey man, hey brother, this guy's not here trying to learn about Hogan. He's trying to expose wrestling. And then Atlas is like, a bunch of the wrestlers were saying that. He's going around asking the wrestlers all these offhanded questions, and we're all talking about it. Hogan and Atlas both agree. They say, well, you know, Vince never directly told anybody to go do anything, but he's sitting there like saying, I wish somebody would go do something. Wink, wink, tap, tap, nudge, nudge, cough, cough. I wish someone would do something. So they're sort of painting it like the boys took it upon themselves. Now, again, I think that's a different narrative than what we're used to hearing. They ask Atlas, they say, so what did Vince think? Like, how did he react when the slap happened? And Atlas goes, man, it wasn't Vince, it was everybody. We were patting him on the back, buying David drinks. They're like, we was celebrating. That's hilarious. And then Hogan, of course, is like, well, we were protective of the business, Jack. And then, of course, speaking of Hogan, they get into the fact that he was the most media ready of all of the wrestlers as it surged into the mainstream, and it wasn't ready for the mainstream. And another example of this is when when Hogan choked out Belzer, which was pretty gangster. I'm not saying it was cool or anything, but even back then, Hogan was a savage protecting the business. I gotta defend Hogan here a bit with that front chin lock. Anybody who's rolled jiu-jitsu, you'd look at that and be like, that's terrible technique. You're not gonna choke him out that way. But when you have skinny 90-pound Belzer, and then you have big old giant Hulk Hogan, and he's like 300 pounds, yeah, just applying a little bit of pressure, dude, you're gonna choke this. It's not like you're the same weight range. His neck is skinnier than your bicep or your wrist, dude. I will defend Hogan. Like, I don't think he thought he was choking and squeezing this guy out. I genuinely think he's just not used to squeezing a skinny neck like that. And then Belzer, like, built a house in, like, Paris from the money he won after suing Hogan and the WWE for this. And so Vince then talks about, of course, 1985, WrestleMania 1. You know, they mortgaged everything they own, everything they have to put this event on. And if it wasn't a success, it would have been done. They couldn't even actually afford this event. And Shane was just talking about how his dad would go, this is gonna work. And, you know, we're betting big on this one, pal. And then, of course, WrestleMania 1, a huge smashing success, much like PWT Podcast and PWT Live Show. Vince McMahon then goes on to say, I don't know if it was good for the rest of the business, but it was good for my business. Dave Meltzer says, well, the business was doing fine up until WrestleMania, and, you know, the territories were still doing fine, but then they completely shit the bed after WrestleMania, is sort of what he's inserting. And I think they're trying to insert, like, he killed wrestling. So the end of episode 1 concludes with them sort of saying, you know, at the end of this triumphant story, you ain't seen nothing yet, because he gets tied up in a bunch of scandals that shortly followed the success of WrestleMania 1. And then it gives us some subtitles that say, you know, in 87, John Stossel settled his lawsuit against Schultz and Titan Sports. In 1990, Belzer settled his lawsuit against Vince McMahon, Hogan, and Titan Sports. Who knows if those amounts were disclosed or not. So that's the end of episode 1, called Junior, of the Mr. McMahon docuseries. My thoughts in summation, they did a really great job of highlighting his youth up until, you know, the smashing success that is WWE. Now, I know the IWC and all the wrestling mark idiots want to go, well, we know all this. Oh, come on now, Phil, we already know all these things. Well, I understand that, but you gotta understand that there's a whole audience that this may be the first ever wrestling show or documentary or first taste of Vince McMahon for a lot of people. So you have to explain the glorious uprise. And they did a good job of teasing what's to come. Again, for me, I'm an uber mark, so there was nothing I really didn't know, but it did pull the curtain back on a little bit. And the fact we're seeing Vince himself say all of these things, it's really wild. And the episode did a good job of just sort of encapsulating this thing for a casual and just giving you his upbringing, sowing seeds of tragedy. You know, he had a tragic upbringing. They seem to be covering everything, you know, and I like how they just sort of touched on the Belzer and touched on the Stossel, because everybody's been telling those stories for decades. Hopefully it's not just like a Wikipedia where nothing gets unveiled. Hopefully we get more nuggets, and I think we will. And I think this channel, PWT, yeah, and your boy Phil Marks are going to do the best job at psychoanalyzing and just plucking out the little nuggets. Like I said at the top of this video, everybody wants to binge it in 6 hours and then give their takes, and these takes, as Husey would say, are cold. You need a sweater listening to them, because it's all, everybody's just like, oh, Vince said this about Benoit and CTE and Stone Cold CTE. Everybody just jumped on the same bit. I'm going to psychoanalyze it and break it down better than anybody else. And that's why you're here. The best pro wrestling clips channel in the world. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe. Make sure you tune back in for part 2.